Today we discuss Sonic. Where is he now, and how does he get back to success? We all know Sonic to be the lovable little hedgehog dating back to his release in 1991 for the Sega Genesis. Sonic back then had much widespread success, selling upwards of 80 million titles, spawning numerous TV shows, merchandise, and even a very successful comic book series. Nowadays, our lovable little hedgehog doesn't garner the same amount of attention. He still has video games that come out, mostly for the Nintendo DS, but they're catered for a younger audience. He did have a very successful app called Sonic Dash not too long ago, and it brought him back closer to those side scrolling platform games from back in 1991. In light of the fact that Sega has announced that there will be two new Sonic games coming out this next year, we want to discuss where is Sonic now? How can he get back to the successful franchise that he once had? We first have to understand that Sonic was created to be the mascot of Sega and to rival Nintendo's Mario. He was created during a time that games had a very basic plot. Back then, most games were about reaching the end of the level. The storyline was usually just very basic. Mario, for example, had a very basic plot of saving the princess. You reach the end of every level to get a step closer to saving her. Mario, however, was a lot slower moving for each level. You took your time to get to the end of the level. Even if you rushed through the level, it really wasn't rushing. Sonic was created to have that same basic plot, but his niche was speeding to the end of every level, collecting items as quickly as he could, while still getting to the end of the level as fast as possible. In 1991, this worked very well for him, and he had much acclaimed success. Sonic jumped to the 3D world before most games did with his release for the Sega Genesis or Sega Dreamcast, excuse me. Unfortunately, along with that jump, they introduced several new characters to the franchise that didn't fit in very well with the overall gameplay. It went from a game that was about speed to a much slower paced game with much slower paced moving characters that just really didn't fit the franchise. Sonic never recovered from this conversion. I think if Sonic wants to have success again, they need to go back to what worked. A game that is fundamentally about speed again. They can still have an awesome storyline, they can still have the open world that is amazing, but the levels have to be about beating it as fast as you can, with very little room to truly explore. Now, we don't want the levels to be so linear that it feels restrictive, and this is going to be a tall order for any game developer to create. But Sega historically is a lot like Nintendo, and they are able to create some really great games. Uh, Nintendo and Sega have a whole lot in common. Nintendo just hasn't really learned it yet. They can put some great games out there. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Star Fox, all of them have a huge following and fan base. Actually, if you watch my series that's coming out here soon, it's the history of Nintendo. You'll actually see that Nintendo never really was great at developing consoles. It was never Nintendo's strong suit. Sure, they had one or two consoles, maybe three, that were really good. But it's not that those consoles were so good so much as they didn't have much competition at the time. And so, for what was out there, it was really good. But we never expect any less from Nintendo to put out some really great games. And we never expect any less from Sega to put out some really great games. And Sega can put out some really great Sonic games. We've seen this happen in the past with the first two Sonic games. The third Sonic game was not nearly as good. And then we've seen some good games that Sega has put out there. Um, some good characters like Shadow that made the storyline, that made the game itself a lot more interesting. But if Sega wants to have the widespread, critically acclaimed success that they once had with Sonic, if they want to get back into the competition, if they want to get back into competing with Mario, competing with Nintendo on a regular basis, they're going to have to make some pretty big changes, some pretty big overhauls to the franchise and the direction that they have taken so far. But ultimately, it leaves them in one of two situations. If they want to appease that older fan base, if they want to get back to making the people who grew up playing Sonic happy again, then yes, they do have to go back into creating a game that is fundamentally about speed, fundamentally about getting to the end of that level as fast as you can, collecting as many cool, you know, items along the way, some of the bonus levels and things like that that made Sonic Sonic, that made it just so cool back in the day. Then they have to go back to that. On the other hand, however, and the direction that Sega is actually most likely to take is, instead of appeasing the older fan base, instead of trying to bring those people back in, they're going to focus on the same people that they've been focusing on. They're going to say in 2016 and 2017, we don't feel like we can compete with those speed based games, so we're going to just cater all of our games to that younger audience. And we're going to keep creating games like what we have. And those games aren't horrible games, they're just not the same nostalgic gameplay that we had with Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. 1991, 1992, those years, they were kind of a long time ago at this point. And it's going to be really difficult for any game to compete in 2016, heading into 2017, using that same gameplay from 1991. Sure, it would be a fun game for a little while, but it's not going to give you that same cinematic gameplay experience that more or less most people have come to expect from video games. Either way, either direction they take, we are excited about 2017. We are excited about the two new games that Sega has announced, one of which is going to go back to that original gameplay. So it will give us that feeling once again. How far back and exactly how they plan on doing it is really still not known yet. But either way, I think we are going to see a pretty good Sonic game. I think we have the capability and the strong possibility, really, since it's coming from Sega, that it will be a great game actually. It may not be the same game, same gameplay that we used to expect from Sega. That doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. It just means that it will be different. And heading into 2017, maybe different isn't bad. I mean, we see that Zelda is going to be taking its own leap of faith in a completely different direction. And that's another game that we are truly excited about. Different's not always bad, but it can be.